That's all I got. Please give them a hand.
So we appreciate you guys coming, and I even see Lisa made it. Welcome.
We're down at the farmer's market.
That's what we heard. Yes.
Nobody tells me nothing.
I'm sure they had some
confess,
fall
I
produce
confess.
down there this evening. Early winter produce would be there tonight. You know, I just met Ivan out here, but we have a lot of mutual friends from my years in journalism, and I would say I really had the benefit. You know, when you're a writer, you like to read writers better than you. So I read like Neil White, you know, and I've read so much of Ivan's work over the years, and so it's great to have you here. We'd love you to give us an overview. It's an amazing title for a book, and it touches my heart every time I look at it.
Well, thank you. The cover, the title is I Keep Trying to Catch His Eye, which came, Max died in February of 2015. He was a junior in college. He was struggling, and you know, he was away at college. We didn't understand the degree to which he was struggling. 3 years later, I was just looking at my phone one day, and the wallpaper on my phone is of our 3 children. Max was the middle, 2 girls. And the 2 girls are looking right at the camera, and they're smiling. And Max is looking up like this. And I was just looking at my phone and was, look at me, you know, saying to him, look at me. And so I keep trying to catch his eye. Now, the thing about the cover you have to understand is that was a self-portrait that Max took. He was a photography major at RIT in Rochester, New York, and the assignment was to take a photo of yourself for your book jacket of your photography. And Max hated to have his picture taken, so he took a picture of himself from the back looking out at Lake Ontario, which, when he made the decision to end his life, is where he did it. In February, he just walked out on the ice. However, I kind of feel like now he's a published photographer, and he completed the assignment. His photo is on a book jacket.
Wow. You know, in Dear William, you know, it's really written to our late son, William, who I found dead of an accidental drug overdose. He'd gone to Ole Miss, been in the Honors College, the Croft Institute at the same time. He was on the track team, and my family all know I love to tell this. He ran in the SEC Outdoor Track and Field Championships, which you have to qualify for. Only the top runners make it in the 400 hurdles, which is one of the most difficult events in collegiate track and field. And, you know, he has this Ole Miss letter jacket, and he was SEC academic honor roll. And he was just such a sweet, but yet competitive and tough individual. To be able to run those hurdles, you're so tough. You have to be so tough. But he was shy, and he battled anxiety. And so he self-medicated, and then he got in over his head. And so we find him dead, and, you know, this book is really, it's not a full book about our late son, William. I didn't want to write Beautiful Boy by David Sheff, who I know and wrote a beautiful book. I didn't want to write Beautiful Boy, but our son dies. I mean, who could take 250 pages of that, right? So what I did was, I was with William the week before he died. And what we were doing is talking about the journey our family had been through in addiction, mental health. And he was working to get in recovery, but I was in a couple of years of getting back on my own feet after my own struggle in fall. And we had another child, Hudson, who lives here now and owns the Oxford Creamery, who was found nearly dead at a fraternity house the year before William died on the Ole Miss campus. And he was in a coma for 2 days, and we were counting days when to pull the plug. We had a daughter embroiled in an eating disorder at the same time. And our whole family was splintering. And so William had told, I was with him the week before he died, and he said, I want to help people one day. He's like, we should do that. And I was like, he said, that's the book you should write. And I was like, yeah, I don't know. He's like, well, one day, you know, and it kind of threw me. I didn't understand what he was talking about. And then the next week I found him dead. So what I wrote is our family story, because addiction and mental health, and so much of that is a family story. And I don't think that's told enough. So that's what this book is. Dear William is about the making. I was adopted into this university community, didn't know who I was, literally, figuratively. And so it's about this journey of finding oneself, what happened to our family, both to him and to us, and ultimately, you know, there's some triumph. We lost one. But also others of us, our family, we've managed to learn how to stay together individually and collectively, those who made it. And so that's really what the story is.
Where, David, on the timeline of this journey you're describing of yourself with William's death?
Great question. So my fall happened when my children were in the throes of theirs, and it was probably still unfolding. And I got back up on my feet before then. And I can tell you, for example, like my son Hudson and I have had a profound effect on each other. William was later in that journey, and so he was trying to get there with us. So I came first. I can't, if I hadn't, it might have really ended worse, because my son and I, Hudson and I, were able to feed off each other. But I'll tell you, I've been like, and you'll see when people read the book, I mean, everybody said to me, well, you don't have any responsibility for this. But, you know, that's not so simple. I did have some responsibility. There's a piece in the book, in Dear William, where I catch him drinking in high school. And I'm stressed by this, and I'm really uptight. And I go over, and my wife's back here, and she remembers as well. We're sitting down. I'm like, sit down. It's after dinner. Pour a glass of wine. And I'm waving a glass of wine to him, and I'm like, I just don't understand. You have so much going for you. You're all state in track. You're making A's in high school. Why would you drink? I don't understand. So I think my journey helped myself and my family, but, you know, it was probably too late for William.
Yeah. Well, we all carry that burden in a different way. I don't have guilt about Max. I don't have a lot of guilt about Max. Where I have guilt is, you know, if you're a parent, you know you screwed things up. But if your children are adults and you still have a relationship with them, you know, it's like any other relationship. It continues, and you smooth over your rough patches and you go. And Max, you know, I don't have any more opportunities for interactions. So that's obviously, you know, there's a lot of woulda, coulda, shoulda there. But early on, I realized mental illness is an illness. And actually what happened, a woman I grew up with is on the faculty at Duke, and she became a national expert in childhood trauma because she worked at Oklahoma State when the Murrah building was blown up. And she's now on the faculty at Duke. We grew up together in Mobile. And she called me the week Max disappeared. We didn't recover Max's body for 8 weeks. We had to wait for the water to warm up before some poor fisherman found him one day. Poor guy. But she called me that first week, and she said, you could not have stopped this, and don't think you could have, unless Max said to you, on this day, at this time, at this location, I am going to attempt to end my life. And don't think that you could have stopped him or try to figure out why he did what he did, because you are thinking with a rational mind. And he was clearly not thinking with a rational mind, and there's no way you can understand where he was. And that was I felt like that was a real gift to me and to my wife and our two daughters. And I was able, if escape is the right word, I just didn't take guilt on. I don't think escape's the right phrase. I just didn't feel I needed to take it on.
No doubt, and I think that is such an important phrasing. And you know, when I say like, yeah, I sleep well at night, meaning my son had a disease as well, and I think that's the real common ground. Whether he would have ended up in an addiction, whether I'm waving that glass of wine, but like in addiction, there is, you know, it's pretty well proven there are, you know, hereditary influences and environment, right? One, nobody's exactly, but often there's both. And so there was certainly some behavior. My son Hudson, who is now 9 years sober, told a story in Family Day, which is why I know environment's important. He told a story in Family Day, the only story he told about me in treatment in Family Day, the only one, about how we were at the beach when he was in middle school, and we had a big family trip, and we were just having fun, and there was a lot of wine at dinner, more wine. The children came up, asked me for money to go get ice cream. You can picture this, right? And so he and his cousins, or brother and sister and cousins, are there. And I reached in my pocket after dinner, got a $20 bill out to give them. And when I put my wallet back in my pocket, I missed my wallet. And I actually remember this, but it didn't strike me like it struck my son. And I missed my wallet going in the pocket again. And my son shared at Family Day about how that was the one thing he shared about me. And you think, like, all this years of parenting, I coached 30 youth teams of his. I drove him to soccer practice across to Tupelo and back. And that's the one story he told about me. So, you know, there is some impact, particularly in the substance realm, in addiction. And so, but would they end up there? Well, sure. I mean, there's other influences. So tell me, you know, this is really hard to say, but I'm going to be honest with you, Ivan. When I found my son dead, you know, the first thing my wife, who's sitting out here, is she was up on the stage last night talking about it. But at first she was like, what are we going to tell people? I'm so worried about the stigma that would be attached to his legacy. So this is what's hard to say, and I'm just going to be honest with you. People would come up to us that didn't know that he died of an accidental drug overdose, and if they thought it was suicide, which there's no difference in the world to me, right? Mental illness, you end up in it's what we're dealing with, right? They would come up sometime like, you know, they would think it was suicide, maybe then they learn it's not, and they're like, oh. There's a relief. I mean, I have to be honest, the suicide stigma, finding a child dead from an accidental drug overdose, we will battle that stigma every day. My wife is like, I'm so hurt that would be his legacy. Suicide. I mean, talk to me about the stigma thing.
Well, I'd be happy to, and look, I mean, first of all, I'm a journalist, so I was going to be open. I didn't want to have to no comment anybody. Second, what really happened, David, so I got a phone call on a Monday night in February, and from a sheriff in Monroe County where Rochester is. Max was at RI2. And they had found his car at the lake front. And I knew just where it was. My brother-in-law has a summer home a mile away. Max was very comfortable in that area. And he said the car had been there 24 hours, and I just knew what had happened. And the police were adamant that they would not ascribe any intent to Max until they found evidence saying that. It was pretty obvious to me. But anyway, it took them 3 or 4 days. They did some forensic work on his credit cards and figured out he had bought some stuff that allowed us to all of us to connect the dots. So, we had a decision. My family had all come up from Mobile to Rochester in the dead of winter, and my wife was I married a Yankee. She's from upstate New York, and they, most of her family, well, all of her family came to Rochester. And we, the police tell us this at 5 o'clock on a Friday, and all the families were getting ready to go to dinner. So I've got to decide, what am I gonna do with this information? And I thought, it was really selfish. I thought, the last thing, I'm trying to put one foot in front of the other. And now I'm gonna have to decide who gets top secret clearance, and, what did we decide about second cousins? Or were they really good friends? Did we tell them everything, or did we just tell them something? I was in the fetal position at that point, and all I wanted to do was put one foot in front of the other. So it was partly selfish. Tell everybody everything. What difference did it make? I just decided, if somebody else had stigma or attached that stigma to Max, that was a reflection on them. It was not going to be a reflection on me. And part of the reason I wrote the book, but really the reason that I gave a eulogy, and this is how I got started on this road, we had a memorial service for Max 5 weeks after he disappeared, 3 weeks before his body surfaced. And nearly 1,000 people came. And I gave a eulogy there and told stories about Max. And I didn't want him to be defined by how he had died. I wanted him to be defined by how he lived. And what I did before the service was read my eulogy to our daughters. Max was the middle child. Because I wanted them to hear, I told them I needed to practice, but I really wanted them to hear the tone of it, and that I was going to make fun of Max, I was going to tell stories about Max, and I wanted them to do the same thing. And they did, and that's kind of how we got started. And it absolutely is healthier for us, and I think it's, look, mental illness needs someone. I keep thinking our parents' generation, nobody talked about cancer, right? And if you did, it was sort of sotto voce, you whispered it, you may not even tell the person who had it what they had. And we brought cancer into the open, and look at the progress we've made.
Right.
So, and I think people are better about addiction in that regard, and probably farther along than mental illness. So, how did y'all end up handling it, or decide to handle it?
We're still working on that.
You'll be back to
And my wife was up on a stage last night in front of about 700 and spoke to that very thing, and she actually said a lot of what you just said. So it kind of was giving me chill bumps just listening to you say that, because it is a thing. So I'm not through with you yet, because I really loved what you were saying. So I'll come back and answer something in a minute. But let me ask you this, because you led me down the road. Like, one thing I will say about people will decide whether, all our books, though, a lot of people have already decided on yours. You got out a week earlier than mine, and you've just had some beautiful reviews. I read what Publisher Weekly said in that beautiful starred review, and congratulations for that. And well, they'll decide whether, what they think about mine. One thing they will see is, certainly for sure, regardless, is a man writing in probably more depth. It took me a long while to get there as a man. So it's interesting listening to you talking, because we've both written from this father's perspective, and I'm very interested to dive into your book, because it can give me a lot as a man, because you've been in the sports world. I've watched some. You've been in it for a long time, and things are this macho, right? I mean, you were in Dallas a while, the Cowboys, the Mavericks, this macho thing, and you listening to you talk, I really admire the ability to you to show the complexity of how a father would think and approach something. I think there's value in that. I mean, did you feel like, because people know you as a sports writer, to take them into your personal journey, I think it's valuable, really valuable to men, women, parents. Did you feel that when you were writing it, like, I'm kind of going a different I mean, this is a different path here.
Well, there's two answers to that, David. The first one is I wrote a proposal to write a book, and I sent it to my agent, who's a wonderful woman in Dallas, and she got back to me 2 weeks later. I was telling Richard this today, and she said, you know, this is beautifully written, but you wrote it like you're writing about somebody else.
Mm.
And I thought to myself, well, you know, no shit, that's what I do for a living. She said, I want to read about you and Max.
Huh.
And it was like, oh, okay. You know, I just never really thought of it that way. And I rewrote the whole proposal in a weekend, which, and then I was, you know, once I sort of turned and looked at it that way, you know, but the other thing, I think to the main point about that point of view, a big reason I wrote the book was to be sort of a docent for grief.
Mm.
I don't think, and again, my experience, I was terrible at grief, and I was terrible at comforting people who are grieving, because I was scared of it.
Mm.
I have spent a long life of avoiding pain at any cost, and then I didn't have a choice. So, you know, with the zeal of a convert now, I was like, this is what this was like for me, and this was what it was like for my family, although my wife and daughters are very clear that this is not their story, it's my story. But I want people to understand that, you know, and if you live long enough, you will confront grief because you will lose someone. And this is what it was like on this side of the dividing line. And so there is pain in the book, obviously, but I don't want people to be scared of it or scared of us, because that was me. You know, if I could conjure up any the guts to say I'm really sorry to somebody, I was very proud of myself, and I would check that box and move on. And meanwhile, they're, you know, trying to put their lives back together. But so that was a big motivation for me, you know, just to try to explain it, not so much paternally.
Yeah, right.
But
No, I
just,
get that.
you know, the scary part for me in terms of personal feelings, and I don't know, I'd be curious to hear how you handle this. I'm a lot more empathetic person now. I'm a lot better person now in that sense, and that's a little unnerving, you know, to think, you know, that I'm a better writer now because I'm a more empathetic person, and it's really, you know, to feel like you somehow profited or improved yourself because of the death of your child. And I struggle with how, you know, obviously I'd rather be the troglodyte I was, you know, if that meant, you know, but that's not what it means, and I understand that, but it's just a weird feeling.
Oh, so I got two things for you. One, and Neil White will appreciate this, having written one of the great American memoirs. Actually, when I first sent my proposal to my agent from this first-person memoir about our family's thing, the exact line Esmond Harmsworth sent back to me, and I actually know your agent pretty well, and so it's amazing. But it sounds like you're writing about somebody else's life. I kid you not.
That's really
And
funny.
they were so right. Anybody in publishing is writing, and Lisa knows this, where somebody like, agents don't have value. Yes, they do. That process got me to a much better book. My agent and my niece Betsy, who's like, Uncle David, if you want young people to write this book, you got to make it, so we're going to keep turning the page. And I kept throwing it out and throwing it out and throwing it out and trying to craft it down. On what you said, like about, wow, so I'm absolutely a better human since my son Lou's death. And I think we're a better family. And I think my son Hudson, who's got 9 years in sobriety, well, he's told me he is a stronger person from his brother's death. And I think my daughter Mary Hallie, who battled an eating disorder, and our whole four that is left, plus now in-laws, grandchildren, there is a richness that is strengthened. And so here's how I found peace with that, because also some of these people have read some of my other books, but they just aren't any good. They're just not. I could sell it and have an idea and get it marketed. They're just no good. People say, I'm going to go back and read your other book. Somebody told me that today. This Dear William, I was like, don't waste your time. Do not waste your time. This is my first book. This is number one. I told Lynn that today. It gave birth to me as a writer. And my son, and so how I made peace with that. I was a pretend writer before, and now it's a whole different world in front of me. Here's how I make peace with that. We souls come through this earth, and we're in this thing. But if we can connect with people, and our souls can leave some bits behind. So your son is gone, and my son is gone, and we have parents and siblings and others people have lost. But if we can connect spiritually with those souls, we can take parts of it. So your son is with you and left apart, and so you were a writer, and you took his talents, that photography, that lens of the eye, and it gave you a better lens of people. My son William had similar insights, and I know I took pieces. It's like pieces of him were divided up among us, you know. And the last thing I'll say on that is, you know, I won't. I'll cry if I do. But yeah,
That's okay.
You know, it's empathy. What you said, I was the same. Maya Angelou or Oprah or both of them, one of them or both of them said, you know, you can't really get anywhere unless you crawled across the floor, and they use different words. But I mean, I don't think you can truly learn empathy until you've crawled across the floor a little bit.
Yeah. And that, I love that phraseology, because I felt like after Max died, that my life, I called it the earthquake that hit our family, and your life is in shards on the floor, and you pick them up and try to glue them together as best you can. And you know, it may be functional. It's not the life you had. It may be functional. You know, that's good.
Does anybody have any questions for us?
Yeah.
Yeah. Neil White, you fire away. Just pick him.
Well, first of all, what great courage you're both showing, both powerful books. Can't wait to read yours, Ivan. And what struck me is that you're taking family secrets out of that dark space where they fester and do great damage, and putting out there in the light that not only helps your own families, but the people who read the books, your friends. So to that point, coming back to you, David, would you talk about the damage of the secretive nature of family secrets with regard to your adoptive father, Lyman, who
Yes.
of us knew? Do you mind doing that?
No, thank you. So, you know, it's interesting for everybody here from Oxford. Neil is somebody who's been a friend for such a long time, and so as he was reading a galley of my book, you know, we were able to exchange in kind of a brotherly way feedback, because he knows parts of life and, you know, my family, adopted family, and everything. You know, this is an Oxford and Ole Miss memoir that probably has never been written, and I'm not sure will ever be written again. It's a university community. I was adopted into Oxford. well, I won't give away the punch of the book or where my life was created, but I was adopted and dropped into this university community, adopted by a professor, and this whole life of this kind of making of a family, forms. And some of you knew my adopted father, and he was the sweetest, most gentle human you could possibly know. I don't think I ever saw him drink. I certainly didn't hear him ever say a curse word, and he made cakes for me on my birthday, and he tried to connect with me all he could. But I also felt like I was dropped off at a strange babysitter's house and nobody ever came to get me, because it was a very dark household in so many ways, and where Neil was going. And my father had a secret, closeted life, and it was unspoken in our house. I found out years later it was known, and he had students that he would mentor and probably relationships. He had some that were non, a lot, the vast majority non, but they were, and he was my dean. I would go over here when I drank too much in a semester and flunked out of school, and he's the one that had to sign my too late withdrawal form, and I have to go home, and I'm in a fraternity, and I see him going in another fraternity house, and it was a world of darkness for me that I battled my own depression, and I didn't understand what it was, and give me a 6-pack of Bud Light and let's roll. And probably because of that is people like Neil and Richard and Lisa and Rodney and so many that have known me for a long time. I don't think I became a man until I was 45 years old, when I just really spoke that. I think I drove up and told my wife after, when we were trying to get back together, not my wife, when I was trying to reclaim her as my wife, or re-earn her, let me say re-earn her as my wife. I remember speaking some truths about what I had faced in my life, and so Neil, my whole life was secret. I was adopted. And so I was told I was adopted, but I had to go take my birth certificate, Richard, to Brandon. You got to show up with your birth certificate. They pack it in your backpack and you take it. And your birth certificate's changed. So it's from the state of Louisiana, New Orleans. And it's like David Magee, born to Betty Magee in New Orleans at this time. They change your birth certificate. And that's like my legal document from the state, which is a fraud. And everything in my house was a lie and a fraud. I literally, like, my mother made things better by telling lies. Everything was a lie. And so that's the answer to that, Neil. And that's really my book, right? It's my maturity of understanding both how that impacted me, but how I am responsible for me to both forgive that and move on. I'm just responsible for me. And what I was doing was duplicating in different ways a lot of that secretive behavior when I had my own downfall. And that's kind of what I talked about earlier about the influence. It's not a cause and but it's like there's influence. Not necessarily in a mental illness, but I'm saying of like my behavior in my story. Thank you for that question. Dig in. Thank you. I know y'all got one more.
Yes.
Well, I was curious to know, with your work on campus now, David, you mentioned, I think you said, suicide and mental health versus substance use and addiction, that in our culture,
Yeah.
people are more tuned into mental health or to suicide, or to addiction rather. But I wonder if you feel like that's the case for college students, particularly being in this town, and one thing I've heard from college students is that we talk a lot about mental health, but when we start talking
Oh yeah.
substance use now,
Yeah,
that's
well,
a different subject.
yeah.
What's your take?
That's a great question, Lucy. Students, and I can tell you, I had a student really frame this well to me the other day. The buzzword in the world right now, and it's real, I'm not saying it's not real, it's very real, But the buzzword in youth and is anxiety, and that's their safe word. That's their safe word that speaks to depression. That's their safe word that speaks to addiction. Though it kind of makes you feel more like when you first hear it over here, over that. So the students they will not self-identify for addiction. I rarely see them. And in fact, they will convince you everything. They will quickly identify, when I'm talking to them, this is anecdote, anxiety, depression, they will quickly identify on that. It really is. But addiction, they will not. Absolutely, that is a shame factor among their peers because there's others doing things, and that would show them is why can't I handle it while they all can? You know?
Yeah.
So you, how many children do you have?
3. Max was the middle, daughter's on either end.
And tell me about his siblings into this.
Well, it's interesting. I kind of, they feel bad for me because I lost a child, and I feel bad for them because they lost a sibling. And I still have my 2 siblings, so I don't really, there is a part there where you ache for someone you love because you can't fathom what they're going through, and we have, we mirror that behavior or that thought toward one another. What we told the girls, and my wife and I, is we don't care how you grieve, but grieve. Because if you don't control when it comes out, then it will control when it comes out. And that may not be at a moment that's convenient for the rest of your life. And the older one, Sarah, has a high emotional IQ, and she went straight to a grief counselor, and she went for probably a year and a half, and she got to a place where she felt like she had her feet under her again. Elizabeth is the younger one, much more private and contained, and we just kind of gently urged her to do it, and eventually she went to a therapist, and she's at a good place now. I mean, but they got scar tissue a lot earlier than I did, and that's that as a parent, that's another hard thing to see. But one thing that I thought about in the early days was people have lost others since the dawn of time, and in earlier generations lost them much more quickly than we do because life expectancy now is so much greater. My own father lost his father when my dad was 10 years old, and he lived a full life despite the scars. And in the days and weeks after we lost Max, people who I knew and was friends with, people in my profession, would very quietly come to me and say, my brother ended his life, my sister was murdered 20 years ago. And that helped me in the sense of seeing what I saw them carry on, what I thought was a day-to-day normal life. And so, the girls, I think they're okay, but we check on each other all the time.
That's so beautiful. I often use that when I'm talking to young people and they ask kind of about, well, what's it like losing a child? And I use that line. I say, like, honestly, I mean, we live in an age now where there is an expectation that you have children and you just know that they are going to outlive you, and it's an expectation. But the reality is we're never promised that. And I say, like, people used to send all their children off to war and they never came back. I mean, since the dawn of time, that expectation was not there, and people lost children. I walk through the Oxford Cemetery and I'm always touched by all the stones of small children with their parents, that died of diseases and things that are around, from yellow fever to, and you're exactly right. And I that's one way we've really made peace, and I know you've done the same, and I cannot wait to what I've read about your book to dig into it, because I know you do that, which is if you, my wife always says, if we will always mourn the loss of our son, right? But we want to keep moving and living, and because, you know, if you just get trapped in that not celebrating who they are. So we made a very conscious decision. We actually, by the way, and I know you had the same, William Magee was amazing. And we had so many amazing years that actually his 20 good ones, I wouldn't trade for 80 mediocre ones, right? And so we made peace with that to celebrate the who he was and move past, as you talked about, like that moment.
Well, yes, and I think early on, I decided, as I said, you know, the fetal position that you want to be in so badly right after the beginning. But 2 weeks after Max's body was recovered, my nephew got married. And so we had to decide right then, you know, did we want to go to the wedding? Of course not. But I realized, and I had to convince my wife of this, and she went and hated every minute. But if you don't accept the joy that is going to come your way, then you've lost again. And that just because this really bad thing had happened to us, it did not mean that the joyful moments were going to stop. So you have a choice at that moment. You know, if you stay in that fetal position that just feels so comfortable because it's the easiest way to ward off the pain, you don't get to experience the joy that will continue to come your way. And that was not as hard a decision as I thought it would be. You know, I just thought I can't stay back where Max is as much as I would like to. So you pick up of him what you can carry. There was a poet named Edward Hirsch who wrote a poem about his son Gabriel who died. It's a beautiful poem. It's a 78-page book of 3-line stanzas, and it's riveting. And there's a line in there about grief is carrying a bag of cement up a hill that never ends. Which really spoke to me, just in the sense of realizing, and as my wife says, we don't do prepositions. It's not something you get over. It's not something you get through. You learn to live with it. It just is. So once I thought that I just have to get used to this weight, that allowed me to okay, I'm not going to get cheated any more than I've already been cheated.
I'm not about to follow that. I will just say that the great thing about writing a book like this is you get to, I've always read Ivan's work. I'm telling you, like I've read so much you have no idea. So it's a real honor to be here with you, and I really appreciate it. Thank you so much, and we appreciate y'all. Thank you.